There is a geometric shape that appears on every continent on Earth. It is not a circle or a triangle or a square. It is a specific configuration of radiating angular bastions arranged around a central polygonal core, designed so that every point of its exterior walls is covered by fire from at least two adjacent positions, eliminating the dead zones that conventional fortification walls left vulnerable to attackers with ladders and explosives. Military engineers call it the Star Fort. Architects call it Tres Italien. And the official historical record attributes its invention to Italian military engineers working in the middle of the 15th century who were responding to the introduction of gunpowder artillery on European battlefields. That explanation is available. It is the default. It is what every military history textbook and every architectural guidebook and every heritage site information board provides. And it holds together coherently enough as long as you examine the European examples in isolation and accept the documentation that surrounds them at face value. The problem begins when you look at the full geographic distribution of the form. Not just Italy, not just Europe, every continent. The Star Fort at Palmanova in Italy, completed in 1593, is one of the most photographed examples of the form. Its aerial view is striking. A perfect nine-pointed star arranged around a hexagonal centre, with streets radiating outward from the central piazza like spokes from a hub. The Venetian Republic built it, according to the official record, as a model Renaissance city and military installation simultaneously. The documentation for its construction is reasonably complete. The architects are named, the dates are recorded, the political circumstances that motivated it are described. Palmanova fits the official narrative cleanly. Now look at the fort of São Filipe in Setúbal, Portugal, the fort of Bourtange in the Netherlands, the citadel of Lille in France, Fort Boyard off the Atlantic coast, the Venetian-era fortifications of Heraklion on Crete, the fortifications of Valletta in Malta. All of them share the same fundamental geometric logic: angled bastions, no perpendicular walls, every surface of the defensive perimeter either a flanking surface or covered by flanking fire from an adjacent position. The official record attributes each of them to named European military engineers working within a recognizable tradition that can be traced through documented professional lineages across several centuries. Then look further. The Qalat al-Bahrain on the island of Bahrain, the star-shaped fortifications at Brest in Belarus, the fortifications of Akko in what is now northern Israel, built during the Ottoman period, following the same geometric principles as the Italian Renaissance examples, but in a tradition that the official record treats as a separate parallel development. The Golconda Fort in Hyderabad, India, whose outer defensive perimeter includes angular projections that follow the same elimination of dead zones logic as the European examples, the Chittorgarh fortification complex in Rajasthan, the fortified structures at various points along the Great Wall of China whose defensive towers project from the main wall at angles calculated to provide covering fire along the wall's face, and then the Americas. The Castillo de San Marcos in St. Augustine, Florida, completed in the 1690s and now one of the best preserved examples of the form in the Western Hemisphere. Its diamond-shaped bastions at the corners of the main quadrilateral follow the European Tres Italien precisely. The official record attributes it to Spanish colonial military engineers working from plans developed in Spain. Fort Marion, Fort Jefferson in the dry Tortugas, the fortifications of Cartagena in Colombia, the citadel above Quebec City in Canada, the star-shaped fort at Nassau in the Bahamas. All of them documented, all of them attributed. Now look at what is not documented. There is a category of star-shaped fortification whose official record of construction is incomplete, disputed, or effectively absent. Not missing because the records were destroyed in a fire or a war, though that explanation is offered frequently. Missing in a more structural way, in the way that the record of a thing that predates the documentation system available to explain it tends to be missing. Present as a physical object, absent as a historical process. The walled enclosure at Khiva in Uzbekistan, in the Khorasan region of Central Asia, whose outer walls follow a geometric logic that matches the star fort principle more closely than the rounded or irregular forms that the documentary record for that period and region would predict. The Mehrangarh Fort at Jodhpur, India, whose bastions project at calculated angles from the main perimeter in ways that the conventional military history of the region does not provide an adequate engineering genealogy for. The fortifications at Diu in Gujarat, India, which the Portuguese built according to the official record, but which show construction characteristics in their lower courses that Portuguese military engineers of the 16th century did not use, and that the Portuguese documentation for the site does not explain. The lower courses are where the anomaly is most consistently visible across multiple sites in multiple continents. The upper portions of many fortifications attributed to a specific period and builders show construction characteristics consistent with that attribution. The lower portions, particularly the foundations and the first several courses of masonry above the foundation level, show construction characteristics that are inconsistent with the attributed period. Different stone, different mortar composition, different precision of fitting, different geometric regularity in the cut of the individual stones. The lower courses are older than the upper courses. This is not always the case, but it is the case often enough and consistently enough across geographically separated sites that the coincidence explanation becomes progressively harder to maintain. The anomaly is documented not primarily by the researchers working in the Tartaria and mud flood investigative tradition, though they have been among the most persistent in cataloguing it. It is documented in the archaeological and architectural conservation reports of the institutions responsible for maintaining these sites. The conservation reports are technical documents written for professional audiences, not popular histories, and they use the careful language of professional practice to describe what the physical evidence shows without drawing the interpretive conclusions that the evidence would seem to support. The lower courses are of different construction. The foundation materials predate the attributed construction period by an indeterminate but potentially significant interval. The relationship between the identified builder and the existing structure requires further investigation. These phrases appear in conservation reports for star-shaped fortifications across multiple continents in multiple languages, attributable to multiple national heritage institutions with no knowledge of each other's findings. The geometric argument is the one that the official explanation handles least comfortably. The star fort geometry is not intuitive. It is not something that an engineer arrives at through trial and error. It is a mathematical solution to a specific problem, the elimination of dead zones in a defensive perimeter against attackers using gunpowder weapons, and it requires geometric sophistication that is either derived from a specific knowledge tradition or arrived at through a specific analytical process. The official explanation says, this process occurred in 15th century Italy and was then transmitted through professional networks of military engineers across Europe and through colonial expansion to the rest of the world. The transmission argument works for the documented sites. It does not work for the sites that predate the documented tradition, or that exist in geographic locations where the transmission networks would not have reached by the time the structures were built. The fortifications at certain sites in Central Asia that show the star fort geometry are documented in their current form to periods that predate the Italian Renaissance. The official explanation for this tends to be that the dating is unreliable, that the structures have been extensively rebuilt, or that the geometric resemblance to the European star fort form is coincidental rather than indicative of a common origin or a common engineering tradition. The coincidence argument is available and frequently deployed. Two independent engineering traditions, working from the same physical problem, might arrive at the same mathematical solution. This is possible. It is the principle behind the parallel discovery of calculus by Newton and Leibniz. Independent discovery of the same solution to the same problem does occur in the history of human knowledge. What makes the coincidence argument progressively less satisfying is the precision of the resemblance. Two traditions independently arriving at angled bastions might be expected to produce variations reflecting different engineering traditions, materials, and defensive requirements. What the full distribution of the star fort form shows is not variations around a common principle. It shows the same specific implementation, the same angles, the same proportional relationships between bastion width and curtain wall length, the same relationship between rampart height and ditch width, reproduced across geographic and temporal distances that the official transmission narrative cannot fully account for. The ditches are a detail that the surface level account of star fort geometry tends not to emphasize, but that the engineering logic of the form makes essential. The star-shaped plan of the walls works as a defensive system only when combined with a ditch of calculated depth and width in front of the walls, because the ditch prevents attackers from bringing their equipment close enough to the wall to use it effectively. The relationship between ditch depth, wall height and bastion angle follows from the same mathematical analysis that produces the star-shaped plan itself. And the proportional relationships between these elements at sites across continents whose documentary record of construction does not overlap are consistent in ways that independent development would not reliably produce. The official history of military fortification identifies the specific engineers who worked out these proportional relationships in the European context. Michelangelo contributed to bastion design theory. Francesco di Giorgio Martini developed early versions of the principles. Giuliano da Sangallo refined them. The names are known, the professional genealogy is traceable. The application of these principles in the European context, from Italy outward through Spain, France, the Netherlands, and then colonial expansion to the Americas and coastal fortifications worldwide, is documented in ways that make the transmission narrative credible for the documented cases. The undocumented cases are the ones that the official history either does not engage with or engages with through the standard mechanisms of reinterpretation, redating, and the assertion that the resemblance is less precise than independent investigators have claimed. These mechanisms are not dishonest in any simple sense. They are the tools that historical scholarship uses to maintain the coherence of its explanatory frameworks against evidence that challenges them. And they are the same tools that have been used in every period of historical inquiry when anomalous evidence has emerged. The tools work when the anomalous evidence is itself unreliable. They work less well when the anomalous evidence is a physical structure that can be measured, photographed, and analyzed by anyone with access to it. The access question is not incidental. The most visited and most documented star forts are the European and American examples, the sites that appear in travel photography and heritage tourism. The sites that fit most uncomfortably into the official narrative are the least visited, least photographed, and least accessible. This is not a conspiracy to suppress inconvenient sites. It is a structural feature of how attention and resources flow in the heritage world toward the well-documented and away from the ambiguous. What the Tartaria investigative tradition contributes to this discussion at its best is the insistence on looking at the full geographic distribution of the form rather than only at the documented subset, the insistence that the lower courses matter. The insistence that the absence of documentation is itself a datum that requires explanation rather than a reason to set the anomalous sites aside. And the insistence that the geometric precision of the form across sites that the official transmission narrative cannot connect is a problem that deserves a serious analytical response rather than the reflexive application of the coincidence argument. The official response, when it comes at all, reasserts the Italian origin narrative, points to the documented transmission networks, and treats the undocumented sites as edge cases, explainable by redating, rebuilding, or independent development. This response may be correct. The Italian origin narrative is supported by substantial documentary evidence, and the transmission narrative is coherent for the sites it covers. What it does not do is engage with the full distribution. It does not explain why the proportional relationships between bastion, curtain wall, ditch, and rampart height are as consistent across the undocumented sites as they are within the documented European tradition. It does not explain the lower course anomalies that conservation reports document without interpreting. And it does not engage with the possibility that the Italian engineers who developed the trace Italian in the 15th century were not inventing something new, but were recovering, from whatever sources were available to them, the principles of a defensive geometry whose first application predated their own work by an interval that the official timeline of human civilization has no room for. The star forts are still there. Every continent, the same shape, the same proportions, the same elimination of the dead zone. The documentation covers some of them. The ones it does not cover are built to the same standard as the ones it does. The archive does not explain that. The archive has not tried to.